morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to Books, Travels, History, and Tales. It's the 29th of August, 2024, and today is special as yesterday AJ celebrated the birth of his baby brother William, and I'm happy to hear that. Now back to business. I'm CW, I'm your host on this channel, the Dudgeon of the Library. I did a quick note the other day on Fort Mose, um, and this edition is also on the first coast of Florida, as they say. So if you ever think about moving to the Sunshine State, take note of its history. You got the Spanish, you got the Portuguese, they're all in the South America, Central America, spreading chaos, killing tribes, with disease and genocide, weapons of mass destruction, you know, horses, firearms, war dogs. You'd think they would throw up a settlement in the mainland of the New World, or at least the mainland of the United States. No, all they wanted was gold, silver, and later on, souls. That's right. The church, they wanted a piece of the action too. After all, they're just soulless, right? What's the harm? You either kill them or you save them. You remember Juan Ponce de Leon? Yeah, nice kid, short. He was a lieutenant for Columbus. Well, he landed in St. Augustine. Oh, God, excuse me. I just threw up a little bit. Probably landed somewhere around Melbourne Beach. St. Augustine is some invention of a land developer. Anyway, but I digress. Well, Juan Ponce de Leon landed to establish a settlement on the west coast of Florida. But he was met with heavy resistance from the Native Americans we know as the Calusa tribe. They were big into border patrol, and they were open for business. Obviously, they knew trouble when they saw it, or they just got word from tribes from the Caribbean about their treatment by the Spaniards. The Calusa tribe of Florida is a group that took out Ponce de Leon, either with a poison arrow or some sort of gangrene before he got back to Cuba. The settlers of this venture fled, leaving cows behind on the west coast. So they left their cows on the peninsula. The cows have their own cracker story. That's in another video. And that was about 1521, somewhere near Fort Myers, probably closer to Cape Coral. It's another piece of argument against the St. Augustine landing, because St. Augustine, I'm sorry to harp on this, has an excellent inlet, something he would have remembered. Why not just go to someplace you're familiar with? But instead, he went back to the West Coast, where he landed the first time. But this didn't end well. Let's move on. I digress. In 1527, another Florida exploration was planned to follow the west coast of the peninsula. Again, nowhere near St. Augustine. Another Spanish conquistador, Panfilio del Narvaez, a conspirator against Cortez, was selected to lead this one. He left Spain with 5 ships, 600 men, and several women. It's got to be hard on them. Also on board was Avar Nunes Cabazal de Vaca. Yeah, let that soak in for a second. Do your Spanish translation. That's right, head of a cow. He was some sort of royal administrator, probably something to do with accounting. So the king sent him. So before leaving Cuba and sailing to Florida, they were hit by a massive hurricane, which was unbelievable. Um, and they caused the loss of 2 ships and 50 men. The storm itself persuaded anybody else going on board this exploration to stay in Cuba instead. But somehow the ships landed in Florida near Tampa Bay, April 14th, 1528. During this exploration, the forces were split up with 300 men and again some women going on shore, and 100 men or so left on 3 ships in the Gulf of Mexico. Well, only a few of those on land made it to Mexico, and not Narvaez, but the cowhead, that guy, he survived to tell the tale. The ships were to shadow the land forces around the coast, but apparently they weren't stocked with very good pilots who were familiar with the shoals. Eventually, they convinced themselves that either the land forces were dead or would find their own way to Mexico. And the three ships, well, they left for New Spain, Mexico, and basically left the other people on their own with no supplies. Apparently, though, of the land forces, one survived. He made it all the way to the Mexico Pacific coast. Apparently, like every other tourist in Florida, he got lost, ran into alligators, mosquitoes, dangerous snakes, and the original Florida man, probably tribes of them. The natives of the peninsula had gotten wise to the Spaniards with their request of food, gold, and silver. The natives always told the invaders, hey, the next village over, they got more than we do. And once the invaders left the area, they left. In 1542, the next group of Spaniards who attempted an exploration or attempted a settlement was Hernando de Soto. He and his merry band of explorers, horses, and fearsome war dogs found no gold or silver, just tourist traps. With wild warriors, the environment of Florida made them face the same fate as Narvaez. Bad maps, worse bugs, heavy armor that doesn't mix well with humidity and swamps caused only misery, pushed De Soto to his own death at the banks of the Mississippi. Don't you want to move here yet? Probably so. Okay, well, again, 1559, Tristan de Luna attempted to establish a settlement in what is called Pensacola. But again, there was a bad moon rising for the Spanish. First, the Mayan god of storms, Huracan, struck. This is where we get the word hurricane from. The storm wiped out a lot of their supplies. By this, I mean it took out the ships, and they were left with very little stuffs. De Luna and his men were basically stranded. They ventured north and hoped to find native Indians or villagers to help them out, but many of the villages they came upon were deserted. Either the Native Americans were dead from disease or they had fled the area because of the Spaniards being in the area. But we just don't know. Also, that was planned, De Luna was supposed to basically build a road between New Spain and somewhere near Charleston, South Carolina. But this just didn't work. Pensacola was left and wasn't attempted to be reestablished by the Spanish until 1698. Let's go back to 1564. Now enter the French. Admiral Jean Ribault landed at the mouth of a river they called May, mostly because of the month. When they arrived in the area, which is now known as Jacksonville, Florida, they offered a prayer of their safe arrival. The French built Fort Caroline in honor of their king. So they built this log fort 6 miles in from the coast on the River May, which is San Juan to the Spanish, St. John's to us. Luckily for the French, the natives in the area were not the Calusa tribe. The natives were very helpful to the French. They provided grain and some game. One of the lieutenants under the admiral, Rene Laudonnière, called for a celebration for the good fortune of the settlement on June 30th, 1564. And on the date, the French gave thanksgiving to God for his blessings in this new land. Well, King Philip II came to power in around 1556. The king stopped the Florida Project in 1561. He was tired of the losses. Much like Dick Nixon did in the 1970s with the ditch known as the Cross Florida Barge Canal. video coming. That is, until a year later, when Philip was informed of trespassers being in their settlement, building a settlement in La Florida. And worst of all, they were Lutherans. So, Admiral Pedro Menendez was selected by the king to root up these Lutherans, or Lutheranos. In fact, he wanted them burned and hung. This is the king. He was very anti Martin Luther. Lutheranos at that time meant all Protestant, not just Lutherans. So, French Huguenots, they were fair game, especially if they're in Florida without an invitation. The Spanish were so much more strict than Floridians of today, as you will see. In the 16th century, when Menendez met up with the French, he put them to the blade and cut out their eyeballs. But now in Florida, you come on vacation, you leave on probation. But now back to the story. So Menendez arrived in this little native village on September 8th, 1564, and named it and established St. Augustine. He called the settlement after Augustine of the earlier church fathers' fame, as he caught a glimpse of Florida on August 28th, which, according to the church, is St. Augustine's Day. Also to be noted, on September 8th, the first time in the mainland United States, African laborers came to the mainland. I doubt seriously they were working on wage or commission, so they were probably African slaves, period. Admiral Menendez was armed with 1,504 men and 19 ships, but some of the French attempted to flee by means of the sea. However, a storm came up and wrecked the ships. Survivors made it to the coast of Florida, probably what is known as Daytona Beach today. After the weather passed, the Spanish under Menendez tracked north from the newly established settlement of St. Augustine for 2 days in hoping to address the encroachment of the French on Spanish turf. By the way, all of the southeast U.S. was considered La Florida, especially by the Spanish. Moving on. The Spanish attacked right before dawn, September 20th, 1569. The soldiers under Menendez easily overran the logged fort. The armed soldiers of Spain faced French farmers in the fort instead of seasoned veterans of war. The battle for the fort was over in less than an hour. The forces under the command of Menendez had only 1 man wounded, while the French lost 132 soldiers and civilians in the battle. Some of the fleeing French made it to the ships and sailed back to France, while noting that from their ships they saw the Spanish removing the eyes of the dead with their daggers and flicking them to the ground. But the other French, the ones that didn't die during the battle or escape, were rounded up. The Spanish loaded the women survivors and the children, who were not considered men of age, onto the ships and sent them to Puerto Rico. The men, on the other hand, were hung immediately. Admiral Menendez placed a sign near the hanging site and basically recorded that these men were not hung because they were French, but because they were Lutheran. Sorry about that, Martin. So, meanwhile, the fleeing French turned up between Daytona Beach and most likelihood somewhere around St. Augustine. Several Indians caught them, brought them to the Spaniards. It was probably the same storm that delayed the raid on Fort Caroline, so probably a hurricane as well. It wrecked their ships, and the Frenchmen made it to shore. Somewhere between 111 and 200. There's different numbers from different sources. They were given a meal by the Spanish and then killed by the order of the admiral. On October 11th, 12 days later, another group of Frenchmen surrendered. This led to another 134 executions by the Spanish. A dozen or so of these captors were spared because they confessed to be a member of the Catholic faith, or they quickly converted and they had some sort of skill that would benefit the new settlement of St. Augustine slash Indian Village. So they were spared. One of the Frenchmen that were captured was the Admiral Jean Ribac. Now, he thought he would escape execution because, well, he's an admiral and he could be ransomed off. Sorry, Jean, didn't work out. More likelihood he was hung or decapitated because it turns out that four parts of his head were mounted on pikes and stuck outside the walls of St. Augustine. Yeah. And now St. Augustine is known as the oldest city in the United States. So, in 1564, a group of pilgrims from Europe arrived on the shores location of a mainland that was named for a Welsh merchant, Richard America. It was actually near North St. Augustine. That's right, stop the tape. That's 57 years before those uptight people with funny hats and buckles on their shoes did the same thing in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Just let that soak in for a second. And don't forget, it was the Spanish and not the British that brought the first slaves to the shores of the mainland United States, 55 years before Jamestown in 1619. And also Florida established the first black freedom settlement at Fort Mose in years before. So if you need a reason to move to Florida, don't just do it for the humidity or the rude tourists or grumpy old people. Move here for the history of the state. We're known for the same thing you are. We just did it before you did. Well, that's history. Or rather, that's Florida's history, and it's all in the past. See you tomorrow when we talk about today. Love to hear those complaints. Subscribe if you like this, because I try to find the weirdest stuff I can. Love to tell a good story. Look forward to your comments. Bye.